the mighty and resilient Merrimack River, carving through the communities of our great region. My name is Linda Lorden, proud president of Merrimack County Savings Bank, and like the river that serves as our namesake, we're a constant yet ever-changing presence. Because to us, it's bigger than banking. It's about powering communities and putting people first. It's about knowing where you came from and where you're going. That's Merrimack style. Visit us at themerrimack.com.
The views and opinions expressed by A Little Bit Culty are those of the hosts and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast. Any content provided by our guests, bloggers, sponsors, or authors are of their opinion and are not intended to malign any religion, group, club, organization, business individual, anyone, or anything. Hi, everyone. I am Sarah Edmondson, and I'm here with...
Hi, I'm Anthony Ames, Sarah's husband, a.k.a. Nippy.
And we're here to talk about things that are a little bit culty. Speaking of, we were in a cult, and we woke up, thank goodness, and we have a lot to say.
And a lot to ask.
This podcast is going to be a deep dive into everything from the red flags to the narcissism, the manipulation, the resiliency, the recovery process, and everything in between. Also, we want to share some of the good we got out of it so you can get all the nuggets without having to join a cult.
If you haven't already, because there are a lot of things out there that are just a little bit culty.
Welcome to A Little Bit Culty, a podcast about the fads, beliefs, and trends that blur the line between healthy and a little bit culty. Please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And find us on Instagram if you have any suggestions for things you have found to be a little bit culty.
Under the surface, the water fills my lungs. This ground I worship has swallowed up its young. And you give for a promise I can't keep.
Welcome, everybody. Hello, Sarah.
Hello, Nippy. How are you?
I'm good. This is our last guest.
Season 1.
Season 1.
God, it's been a blur.
Yeah.
And thanks, everyone, for all the suggestions for what to do in our second season. We literally have about 100 people to interview, which reminds me, if you have a cult that you want us to, or a group that's a little bit culty, it's super helpful if you can also suggest somebody to speak to. Otherwise, because we're not really investigative journalists yet.
We have Google.
Yes, that's true. It does help if we have a guest.
I got my degree from Google.
Which reminds me.
You have a degree from Google as well?
I do not have a degree from Google, but did you remember that Keith was designing his own World Wide Web? Oh, and he said that he actually invented the browser, and that technology got stolen from him.
So that was the first court case I read by a judge in Houston where he went and the woman, the judge,
called him a pathological liar.
Called him a pathological liar.
That was for when he said.
I just went, oh,
but that was for.
God.
That's when he said that he
invented the technology for conference calls.
Yeah,
and that one of his scorned lovers stole the patent note that he had, and they went to confiscate it, which basically tied her up in litigation. And then the judge realized she was just dealing with a pathological liar.
So wait, he invented not only the web browser, but he also invented...
He invented language, Sarah.
He invented so many things, and he was never acknowledged for these inventions. I wonder how he caused that. Anyway, the thing that he also was trying to invent when we were still in Nexium was a company called Plugged In. And this was a company that was going to reinvent the World Wide Web, and it would basically be his own private version of the internet, so that it could never be hacked.
It basically was something that was going to make sure your data was your own.
Yeah, to protect your data, and I remember he gave, this is a pseudo chaps my ass, because he always would give us these ridiculous assignments, and one of the assignments was that he wanted to know where everybody lived in Vancouver, so that he could put up these, like, whatever the technology was for this internet, like these nodes or these towers or something. So he wanted the distance between every person's home in the Vancouver community, and he wanted the topography of the landscape so he could measure the distance to put up the nodes for Plugged In.
He wanted to know where his harem was at all
I think
times.
he wanted to know where the ladies were at.
Sick.
Oh, everything is so clear in
Narcissism,
2020 vision.
Narcissism. It's
Narcissism.
being outed, which is the perfect segue to introduce our final guest for season 1.
We actually have a narcissist expert lined up. Our guest today is a licensed clinical social worker and a psychoanalyst in private practice in New York City and in Nyack, New York. I actually met Dan when I first got out of the cult, and I think it was from the list that Bonnie made of all the different resources, and Dan Shaw was on that list as somebody who could help counsel me and also deprogram me. And I just remember he really explained a lot of the systems of control that were being used on me, not even so much normal therapy, just helping me understand how the structures worked and how I had been a victim of undue influence.
Dan Shaw originally trained as an actor at Northwestern University and with the renowned teacher Uta Hagen, and later went on to work as a missionary for an Indian guru. His eventual recognition of the cultiness of this organization led him to become an outspoken activist in support of individuals and families traumatically abused in cults.
At the same time as he was leaving this group, Dan began his training in the mental health profession, becoming a faculty member and supervisor at the National Institute for the Psychotherapist in New York.
His book, Traumatic Narcissism, Relational Systems of Subjugation, was published by Routledge in 2014 and was nominated for the Distinguished Gradivo Award. In 2018, the International Cultic Studies Association awarded him with the Margaret Thaler Singer Award for advancing the understanding of coercive persuasion and undue influence. Shaw's book, Traumatic Narcissism and Recovery, Leaving the Prison of Shame and Fear, will be published by Routledge in 2021.
So, in short, in the cult world, he's a bit of a legend. We've actually referenced him a number of times throughout this season. So we're very happy to be introducing him as our last guest of season 1. Without further ado, Dan Shaw.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean, hanging on to the weight of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
Thanks for squeezing time on your vacay for us.
It's a pleasure.
One of the things that we said in our banter, there's so many experts, it seems, right now on narcissism. And luckily, this has sort of become part of the current social desire for understanding, like, how does this happen? And people are using the word gaslighting more, and it's becoming more popular to understand it. We could have asked so many people to be on our show, but we wanted to talk to you specifically because, A, you were one of the first people I was referred to when I got out of NXIVM and were one of my therapists or deprogrammers or counselors, yes, on the Team Sarah therapy crew. And also you are an expert in narcissists and narcissistic behavior, which we're going to talk about. And also you have your own cult experience. So we felt like you were the perfect guest to be on our show. And in addition to all of that, you have a great deal of experience with deprogramming and helping members of NXIVM. So you checked all the boxes, Dan. And that's why we wanted you on our show.
Great.
And we're just so happy that you're here and could spend time with us.
I'm so happy for you, for the podcast, for the vow. All of this has led to this astonishing phenomenon where I'm getting 2 to 3 calls a day since August about cult exiting. This has never happened ever in my whole career, more than 25 years. But I'm convinced it's largely due to the vow and the other NXIVM documentary and all the surrounding publicity and all the efforts you and Nippy and all the others, Mark and everybody else, and Catherine, all of you made this amazing effort. And I think it's really made a difference. It shows up in my inquiries. It's unbelievable. And of course, there's only about a dozen of us worldwide that have licensed mental health licenses who have the cult experience behind us. So I think we're all full right now. I think we're all full.
That's wild.
It's interesting, and it's difficult to ascertain what causes what, but it definitely seems to be, even if you're following it somewhat superficially, words and language are starting to merge into the lexicon now. And I think now more than ever, I think the experts need to come in and define it so we can have those terms, defined succinctly so people know what they're talking about. Because I think when you say gaslighting, when you say narcissist, a lot of people have a different kind of thought object of it. And it's important to give a platform to those people who are the experts. And I kind of feel like Sarah and I have a good opportunity to use our platform in that matter so that, you guys can come in and really hone the language of this.
Yeah,
Also known as drop knowledge.
Yeah, drop your knowledge.
absolutely. It's good for the world.
So with that, we're going to go through, our questions, get your story, hand it over to you. And then where I think the audience might be confused, I'll stop you and get you to, whenever we get to experts, when I listen to certain experts, I sometimes pause it and have to go Google things. So we're going to be the stopgap between you and Google.
Okay, good. I'll try to sound like a normal person.
Okay, good. We'll help you get there, I guess, but you're doing great. So before racking up those impressive postgraduate degrees and credentials in psychoanalysis, you were a student of yoga and meditation for more than a decade. You lived in India, traveled extensively as an international organizer, and managed yoga education programs. Is that the chapter of your life where you became interested in the study of cults and charismatic leaders? Can you help our listeners understand how your yoga journey led you here?
Yeah, it is leaving that group that weirdly coincided with starting my graduate degree in social work. It forced me to think about what the hell just happened to me for 13 years. Mm-hmm. I had been an actor in New York and I was struggling and I had some success, but not enough. And I didn't have the emotional fortitude to endure what it takes, even though there were wonderful times in that period in my 20s. But toward the end of it, I was just so desolate. I was despairing. And a bunch of theater people in New York were into city yoga. The whole cast of For Colored Girls had gotten into it. Marsha Mason, a bunch of celebrities, and friends of mine were into it. So just at the end of my acting career, I get introduced to Swami Muktananda and city yoga. And it was an immediate love bomb inside and outside. I started meditating and I stopped feeling so depressed. I started going to the community center and I started feeling full of life. And I was chanting and meditating and eating vegetarian food and burning incense. And it was so great. They have intensive programs like you guys in Nixium have all of these escalating programs, right? So in city yoga, it's an intensive. Oh, and by the way, Kristen Keefe told me that she and Ranieri used to go to the ashram up in South Fallsburg, the city yoga ashram. They used to go there a lot. And so when I see Nixium behavior, I see what Keith took. V-Day.
That is fascinating.
V-Day is Guru Purnima. That's what we do in the ashram for Guru Purnima. Same as V-Day. And those sashes, that's what Guru Maya gave the VIP guests. She put a silk sash around or a pashmina shawl around people.
I had heard that rumor. That Keith used to go up to the ashram and saw it and liked the adulation and thought that he wanted a piece of that action.
Exactly. I think he also ended up getting kicked out, and being asked not to keep coming. Anyway, by the time I got into it, I was all the way up to top level management. I was good at what I did. I worked 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. I didn't have to take any vacations or holidays because I was on a mission from God, I got kicked out 2 years before I left. I got told to go move out. I didn't want to. I was crying and begging. But I was told to move out and get a job and see a psychologist. Apparently, I had too many emotional problems to be a cult member. So I did see a therapist, and he was not in the cult. And it was with that therapist that about a year into it, first of all, I met my wife and fell in love. And she was also in the group, but not as heavily as I. And I was in therapy, and I finally said one night to my wife, the guru is cruel. Guru Maya is cruel. And my wife didn't call the city yoga police or react. She just listened. And when I said it to my therapist, what he said was, well, I think what you mean is tough love. And I said, no, what I mean is sadistic cruelty. Now, to be able to say that and still be a follower, that was a turning point. And it wasn't too long after that I left, which was triggered by a New Yorker magazine expose about the sexual abuse of a particular young woman was the impetus for that story. And I had known her since she had grown up as a little girl in the ashram. She was a lovely person. And when she had gone to the guru to explain what was happening to her, one of the guru's partners in the hierarchy had been seduced her. When she went to the guru, the message back from the guru was, it's your own fault and don't ever tell your mother. And literally
Jesus.
the minute I heard that, my wife and I left. We left Siddhi Yoga in 1994. And literally practically the next day, I started my graduate degree. So I knew early on that I was going to have to write a final paper. And I decided early on it was going to be called Traumatic Abuse in Cults. And that's the first paper I ever wrote. And that got published in the International Cultic Studies Journal. So that was the beginning. Meanwhile, after the graduate degree, I immediately went to 4 more years of psychoanalytic training because that's what I wanted to be. Not a cult expert, but a psychoanalytic psychotherapist. And that was very rigorous, so I was in school for 6 years, had my first child, and had no money. I knew that I had found the career that I wanted. And I knew that leaving Siddhi Yoga was probably the most devastating thing in my life, but also the most important thing.
I have a quick question for you there. So before you were kicked out, were you disenfranchised at all? Did you kind of feel this isn't going in the way, or was it you got kicked out and then that triggered the disenfranchisement and then it was a matter of time at that point?
What actually happened, at least as I have put it together, was that I was sent to Tokyo to do advanced work for Guru Maya, and I did a bang-up job, and it was a huge success. And I worked with 19 non-English speaking volunteers and 1 English speaking volunteer. And we got press conferences and it was great. So having successfully done that, I got elevated within the group and I began to be special and have special audiences with the guru. And one night she was bashing one of the leading teachers as she spent most of her spare time bashing people in front of others. So she was bashing this guy. He wasn't there. And I, in my newfound role as special person next to the guru, said, he's really so devoted. I disagreed with her. And she gave me a look like she was going to incinerate me, like I was going to turn into a pillar of salt from her eyes. And from that moment on, she began battering me day in and day out for 6 months straight, like with other people joining in and in front of everybody all the time. It's called being put on the hot seat.
Right.
Weirdly, it's like a special honor because you're being purified in the fire of blah, 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 blah.
Well, in that premise, you take it on like, well, you're getting help in your growth.
Oh man.
Right? Yeah.
You're having the toxic sludge just evacuated out of you. Whatever the metaphors are, but it was also excruciating. And by the end of it, I couldn't speak. One day I came with my notes to tell her what was supposed to happen that night in the public program. And she signaled one of her secretaries to come and light my notes on fire. And she made me hold them while they burnt until the last second before my hands started burning. That was it. It was soon after that. She said, you need to leave and see a psychologist. So I was just tortured for 6 months straight.
That seems to be like a very aggressive form of gaslighting.
Aggressive form of gaslighting, indeed. But of course, while you're in the midst of it all, you're just being purified. You're just your ego is being purified,
Would you mind just defining that term gaslighting for anyone who doesn't know?
Well, it comes from this great movie. I won't become film nerd right now, but it's called Gaslight. And it's the story of a woman with a lot of money who marries a guy who slowly drives her insane so that he can steal her money. And every time she tries to point out the things that he's doing, he totally denies it. And he just says, oh, my dear, you poor thing, you must rest. So he drives her more and more crazy. And it's a fabulous movie. Everybody should see it. It's a Hollywood classic. But, what we mean now by gaslighting is not necessarily that somebody deliberately wants to drive you crazy in order to exploit you. But gurus do need to drive followers insane in order to exploit them. They need to make followers feel dependent, ashamed, needy, scared. Every cult leader does this to every follower. You know, you might get elevated for a while, but then you're going to fall. So you're always being made to feel that everything is your fault. You know what gaslighting is? You heard the clip of Raniere telling Allison how to set up DOS.
Mm-hmm.
That was pure gaslighting.
Just to add to it, my understanding is also that this man turned the oil down on the gaslight so it was too dark to read, and he pretended that he could read, and she was like, "It's too dark for me to read," and he's like, "What are you talking about? It's totally fine."
Exactly.
So she thought she was crazy. Yeah, we should watch that movie, Nippy.
I've seen it.
Oh well, he's ahead of the game, isn't he?
Charles Boyer and Ingrid Bergman, directed by George Cukor. Must see.
And since we're on the definition section of our program, could you also define narcissist or narcissism?
Well, I'm defining traumatic narcissism as somewhat different from the psychology version of pathological narcissism.
Okay.
Pathological narcissism is something you talk about as like this person is a pathological narcissist. And it's like inside of them, they have these problems. But my whole takeaway from being in the cult and observing the guru, and then others in my personal life and others my patients, once I became a clinician, started telling me about, my feeling was that narcissism is a relational system. There has to be a predator narcissist, and there has to be his mark, his target, right? So I'm going to tell you what I think a traumatizing narcissist is. I think that's a person who has a need to be perfect and always right, never wrong, and has to get somebody else to submit to him or her and believe the same thing. He has to believe delusionally that he's perfect and right, because otherwise he would die of shame. He's grown up in some way being humiliated, being shamed. Shame is unbearable for a narcissist. So the traumatizing narcissist figures out how to have no shame by having a delusion of omnipotence, of being perfect, blameless, shameless, flawless, and has to have a follower who's going to hold all of that blame and shame and neediness and vulnerability for him. He's going to deny it in himself, and he's going to make others be the ones to hold it. So I think you can recognize this in the way Keith behaved.
100%. Now, in retrospect.
Yeah. And so the traumatizing narcissists are people who, like, they're very grandiose even though they're insecure, or they're very insecure even though they're actually more grandiose, and they sort of flip from one side to the other. But a traumatizing narcissist doesn't flip. He maintains dominance by his delusion of omnipotence, and he needs then followers or significant others who submit and who are subjugated, who are under his control, and who hold all of that shame and dependency that he disavows.
It's kind of the ultimate parasite, ironically.
Yes, it's also Dracula, and it's also zombies. It's like you're dead and you have to eat live people's blood to be, to keep your status, right?
Wow. And here he was teaching us that it was so terrible to be dependent.
He's the most dependent of them all. The most dependent. Did everybody look at V Week? What the fuck is V Week? But I need.
So when we were in it, if anyone were to say that to me, I'm just putting myself back in like the headspace of 10 years ago, I would have thought, he doesn't need that. That's his followers just paying him tribute.
Exactly.
So, because he was very strategic, I think, in making it look like none of it was his idea.
Oh, yeah.
I don't need this, guys. I mean, if you want to have 10-day birthday celebration as a present, and that's, I'm not your guru. Like, he did this whole faux humble thing, right, Nip? Like,
yeah, it was also for me. V Week was to me kind of a corporate retreat more than celebrating his birthday.
But we did celebrate his birthday. Like every center put on presentations for him, remember, which we hated.
That was a never ending.
It's like the gift of the Magi. You all had to come bearing frankincense and myrrh and lay it at his feet.
Yes. And our presentations were never good enough, Dan. Do you know how many times I got in trouble for having subpar presentations?
Of course.
Like we made films, we did dances, we did group choreography with like 60 people. It was never good enough.
Look, he didn't want to have V Week. That was everybody else's idea. The same way he didn't want to have DOS. That was everybody else's idea. Same
Right.
bullshit.
Right.
Since we're on a little comparison here, I was just curious, since most of our listeners have been following the Nexium story. So in working with me as my counselor during this time, I mean, I remember so many good nuggets that I got from working with you, but I was just curious what you saw without breaking client confidentiality with other people. But I felt like as you talked to more of us, you started to see certain patterns in relation to your own experience. And I was wondering if you could share some of those things that you saw as a consistency in the type of abuse that we endured at all different levels. Like I've said in many other interviews, like what I experienced was very different than people who lived there or who were with Keith in a closer capacity or even sexually. What did you see as a consistent pattern?
Well, if you saw Robert De Niro portray Bernie Madoff just died in jail. It's an excellent film. The actual reporter who interviewed Madoff extensively was in that movie. And the last scene is her talking to him in jail. And she says something about him being a psychopath. And De Niro's last line is something like, wait a minute, you don't really think I'm a psychopath, do you? And that's the end of that movie. Well, these people are malignant narcissists is the way that I would put it. And malignant narcissist is the term Erich Fromm came up with when he studied Hitler and he studied other dictators and people like this. They're like the traumatizing narcissist, but they go big. They go national. And what's really motivating them more than anything else, they're never going to acknowledge any shame whatsoever about anything. They have to believe there's nothing they can do or say to anyone that can ever cause them to feel ashamed. And then people go wild for that. Wow. You mean we could just be ourselves and not be ashamed and just say what we want, be angry with the way we want to be and, just be rude and cruel and mean because that's righteous. It's like cruelty becomes righteousness. Shame in a normal human being, which, by the way, is in every human being. It's there for a reason. We have to learn. We have to develop a moral compass about what's right and wrong. And without shame, we don't really learn that. Shame becomes an incentive. In order not to feel ashamed, we're incentivized to do good. But these guys, in order not to feel ashamed,
Right.
are incentivized to be delusional and megalomaniacal.
We tell our stories. We change the world. A Little Bit Culty is proud to support the #IGotOut project, which empowers survivors of cultic abuse to share their stories online as a catalyst for education, prevention, and healing. Learn more about the #IGotOut movement and find resources at igotout.org.
Quick follow-up to the role of shame and how it relates particularly to narcissistic leaders. Sarah and I are watching Yellowstone, and there's a scene in it where the sister is talking to the brother about the best politicians are good politicians are narcissists. The best ones are psychopaths.
Yeah, one of those.
Right?
One of the.
And I immediately accessed this book I read about Stalin probably about 10, 11 years ago. I think it was called Stalin's Follies. And the body count on Stalin is still being tallied by the Russians. They don't really know. And the reason Hitler's so well documented is because it's all on film and it was documented. There was a poll in Russia, I remember reading like in 1990, 1991, and 51 to 52% of the population considered Stalin a national hero. It was mind-boggling to me when I read that. And this pertains to the shame. of that thing is they don't seem to ever feel the shame, or there seems to be a lack of acknowledgement of it. And I wanted you to comment on that, because I just think it's, and I wonder, like, if someone who's sitting in a jail cell right now feels that, acknowledges it, or how does that work? What's the mechanism? And I asked a similar question in our last one, and the response was good, because we don't really know, because we don't have a lot of psychoanalysis on these people. But your best shot. What do you think?
I think there are some people who may in fact have a genetic disposition towards sociopathy or psychopathy, or, that's probably true. But I think for a lot of people, they have to experience growing up intense chronic humiliation. Robert J. Lifton studied Shoko Asahara, the guru in Japan that had his, very highly educated academics and scientists release nerve gas in the subway because they were going to purify the world to save it. When Shinrikyo grew up, he was bullied and teased by his peers. He had a terrible vision problem, and he felt ashamed of it. He later went bankrupt selling fake Chinese herbs. And ultimately, he becomes this guru. I mean, look at Hitler, this totally nebbishy, incapable of succeeding guy. These people find a way to completely banish shame from their psyche. But it's denial, it's disavowal, it's dissociative. It's not normal.
The Frankies were a picture-perfect influencer family, but everything wasn't as it seemed.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here asking for help. He's emaciated. He's got tape around his legs. Ruby Frankie is his mom's name.
Infamous is covering Ruby Frankie, the world of Mormonism, and a secret therapy group that ruined lives. Listen to Infamous wherever you get your podcasts.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip leg day or never miss yoga. Maybe it's getting 8 hours of sleep. I mean, that's my personal and everyone's dream, isn't it? Well, I definitely have some non-negotiables. Like, I'm in Vancouver right now, and I'm spending literally as much time as I can outside in nature. Hashtag cold pools, hashtag crushing it. Nature is a non-negotiable. Not enough time in the fresh air and the trees around me, and I start to feel not great, not myself, not grounded. Therapy day is a bit like my nature walks. I try to not miss it, and I know I'm just going to feel so much better all around if I make it a priority. I get so much out of it. It helps me put my worries and anxieties in their rightful place and helps me clear my mind so I can focus on what I really need and sometimes what I don't need. Like, I don't need to be overbooking myself just because I hate to say no to people. You know what I mean? Thanks, therapy. Thanks for helping me see that. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist. And switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Look, even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/culty today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/culty.
So if I try to see this, someone without shame looks free to someone who does have shame. And if you don't see shame as a necessary requisite for you to have empathy, morality, you're going to see that person as free, and you're going to potentially see yourself as limited by your shame when it's actually an asset.
That is so well put. That's right on.
Okay.
That's it. You
Nailed it.
All right.
I don't know if we've talked about this anywhere else, but this just reminded me of something that Keith actually talked about in forums a number of times. You've probably heard this already, Dan, that he taught us this psychological makeup of a sociopath. He called it a suppressive, right? Somebody who doesn't have morality because they see the world as a range of options, and they'll do things that people with morality would never do, like lie, steal, and cheat. so that they have more options than a normal person. Therefore, they appear to be even more, what's the word?
Confident.
Confident. Yeah. More confident and free, because they will do all these things that we would never consider because we have morality.
Right.
And he said this example. Do you remember this about the robots?
Yeah.
Yeah. So check this out. And we thought he was just teaching us about what to look out for in the world. We didn't realize he was teaching us about him.
They would masquerade as thought exercises.
Yes. He would do thought exercises with us a lot. And the exercise was, imagine being in prison.
Yeah.
And you're in prison, and to get out of the prison,
which he doesn't have to imagine anymore.
Right. Ironically, to get out of the prison, you're going to have to kill the kill the bodyguards. And imagine that as a person, that's really like, to be free, you're going to have to kill a human. And that's hard, right? So imagine now that you're in prison and the bodyguards are actually robots. Would you feel better about dismantling a robot to be free? And then people go, yeah, of course. I could just, dismantle the robot. He's like, well, that's what it's like for a sociopath. Humans are just robots in the way. You don't see them as humans that you'd have to hurt. It's just robots to get out of the way to achieve your goals.
Wow.
So that's him.
It's blood curdling to hear.
But I know, I just got shivers. And the joy that he probably got sitting up there on his stupid fucking throne. I say throne with, it was a chair, but it was elevated. And him telling us these stories, and we're all like, oh yes, thank you, Vanguard, for educating us on the nature of sociopathy. Well, he's like, yeah, that's what I'm doing to you right now, you suckers.
Yeah, I mean, among the most sadistic things he did was have people watch those films of beheadings. He was just unbelievably sadistic and cruel. And it was very largely aimed at women, in the name of creating a band of alpha men. I mean, he was creating, army of betas for himself, to go try to make him prosper and spread the word, spread the gospel. It's so fortunate you guys stopped him, you and the others. We know who they are, and they are extraordinary, all of you. But I was worried like hell for you, Sarah and Nippy, and for all the others, Mark and Bonnie and everybody, because nobody ever got out of a cult and did what you did. Everybody who got out of a cult is more like me. Spend a year trying to pretend like it didn't happen before you start to realize, what the fuck happened to me? You guys went like, boom.
Well, it's interesting, Dan. That's why I asked you the disenfranchised question. For me, I had been disenfranchised for a while. I felt like the reason I was there, and I think in Janja Jelich's book, it's called Moral Injury, the mission, it wasn't happening. We were throwing rocks at Tank, and it just felt it wasn't happening, and I didn't see it happening.
Yeah.
But I also felt like the hooks were in me. It was like, okay, it's going to be hard to do what we're doing. It's not going to be easy, and it takes a certain amount of effort for you to achieve any goal. No matter what you're going to do, no matter what I was going to do in my life, it was going to be difficult. And I understood that in trying to be successful in anything. But then I just kind of felt like there were so many things I was disenfranchised with. So the pivot, when the actual violent thing was obvious to me, was easy.
Yeah.
And while, I do appreciate you saying, we did the right thing, we were dragged into this. I'm not saying I would have walked away from my wife being branded. That just wasn't going to happen. I just didn't know my recourse just yet.
Yeah.
But because Claire Bronfman got on a plane and tried to get my wife arrested, we were forced to go do certain things. Mm-hmm. So the narrative that we destroyed this community and that was our objective, it wasn't until we were dragged into a fight. And then when you go into a fight, you can't hit half-heartedly.
No.
You can't go in and slap. You got to go in and you got to throw your punch as hard as you can. And for whatever reason, we had a lot of things line up for us where powers to be in the universe and, Mercury was in retrograde, whatever you want to say, it lined up where our punches landed, and it turned out it was a paper tiger because, it was a house of cards that we ended up punching. So we threw hard punches, but we didn't know we were exposing. So yes, I appreciate you saying those things, but we were dragged into it. We were scared.
But we also chose to fight.
I've said this to Sarah many times. There was no way he was going to get away with doing that to my wife.
When you spend any time in a cult at all, day in, day out, hour after hour, day after day, all you're fucking doing is submitting. Mm-hmm. And if you get out and you don't find a part of you that can fight, whether it's to bring your cult down or not, because most people don't succeed when they try to do that, you're a rare exception and a great model. But even if you don't fight to bring your cult down, you got to be fighting to take back your life. If you don't have a fight in you about that, you're just going to go find another cult. You got to fight to take back your life when you leave a cult.
But that does take a lot of work. And I remember you asking me that in one of my first sessions. You were like, do you want to maybe heal first before you become an activist?
Yeah.
And I was like, I think I got to become an activist. Like, I mean, by activist, I mean, I'm actively taking it down and bringing people out and trying to educate people as to what's really happened and everything.
It was either crush or be crushed. So you had to fight.
So, what challenges do people have leaving a narcissist leader in spite of all the evidence that may be pointing to the fact that they're a narcissist leader and they're being abused?
Like, what keeps them in, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, both questions are, they're two sides of the same question. What keeps you in and what's hard when you leave? You develop an attachment bond to the narcissist. You're seduced. You see a part of them that looks like it has the most love anybody ever had, and they're going to give it to you, especially if you're in a vulnerable place in your life, as many people are when they get involved in these things. Most people, I would say, are in some kind of vulnerable place in their life, as I was at the end of my 20s. So you see somebody who looks like they have the most love of any human being you've ever met, and they're going to give it to you. You form some kind of a bond that's like the bond of an infant to a parent, to a mother. This person has the love that I need in order for me to become who I want to be, is how it feels. Once you've started on that path, as we all know about the frog in the water that slowly heats up to a boil, if they start being cruel and abusive, you tell yourself that it's part of the love, and you keep expanding the definition of what their love is until their love means that they want you to get branded, or their love means that they want you to go after one of their enemies and throw acid in their face. I mean, people in cults are violated. What a cult leader does is they teach us to let them violate our boundaries, and then they teach us to violate other people's boundaries on their behalf.
Right. So how does defending or expanding their definition of love lend to them expanding their own delusion?
Right. Well, the more people are submitting to them, the more it's clear to them that, I really am God. I was saying I thought I was, but look, here's these 1,000 people. Every woman is willing to have sex with me, and every man would let me beat him up if I wanted to. Great, I must be God. That's the way Rajneesh was,
Right. With his Rolls Royces.
Yeah, right. And I'm trying to get to why it's so hard to leave. But when you do leave, it's usually because you've been tortured to a point where you finally can't take anymore. Then what's hard, this shameless asshole cult leader is still shameless, but now you are totally ashamed of yourself. Mm-hmm. Now you've left, and now you have to face a world where everybody says, what the fuck is wrong with you? Why did you stay? And why didn't you leave? And that. And, everybody is looking at you like you're a three-headed freak because you are so stupid that you were in that cult. So you now are stuck with all the shame that this asshole refuses to experience. And that's what happened for me. I said, you know what? That's bullshit. I had to fight because I was 42 and I was penniless and I wanted to have a life. And so I fought like hell to get the money from people to help me get my degree and get my training and to start a family. And I just fought and fought and fought. After a while, I can honestly say that I don't have to fight so hard anymore. It took a long time, though. It took a long time.
That's good. I'm glad to hear that.
Here I am sitting by the river in the sunlight, enjoying life this weekend.
And not feeling like you have to hustle and do and work and
well, I'm working.
These others.
I'm working.
Yes.
I'm actually correcting the proofs on my next book. as
I
we
can't wait
speak.
to read it.
You're writing books. That's pretty impressive.
Dan, we have a couple questions from our audience. A number of people asked, is it ever possible to convince a narcissist to seek treatment?
No.
Like, can you fix a
I think we've
narcissist?
figured that one
Probably
out.
not.
Well, sometimes it depends. If they're low on the spectrum, if they have a spark of decency, yes. But if they have crossed that line where there's no more decency and no shame, probably not.
You know, one of the biggest mind fucks I've seen in people who remain loyal is you talk about how they feel the shame, trauma, or whatever it is. They've convinced anyone that is still loyal to them that in order for them to own their own shame, it's weakness. So that's one of the things that prevents them from leaving. They have to actually go internal, admit they were conned, admit they were a victim, admit those things. And he has them convinced that doing that is the very dishonorable act.
Yeah.
And a sign of weakness when it's actually a sign of strength.
Yes. I know everything gets turned around.
And also, the irony of people who can't see yet that they've been conned are still living in the doctrine of there's no victims, right? So, except for Keith, of course. Keith is a victim of the system.
Yeah, no.
He's a victim of prosecutorial misconduct. He's a victim of
He's a victim of you and Nippy.
yeah, I know. God, we were really potent, I guess.
Well, you are, because, you stood for something true and honest as opposed to what he was standing for. That's powerful in the end.
I remember our first sessions weren't like traditional therapy. They were more like you explaining cultic structures to me so that I could go, oh, that's what just happened.
Right.
And one of the things, and I'm still struggling with it always, is like being so concerned about the people that are still there. And one thing that you said that was really helpful for me was reminding me that it's like a sickness. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, about how to see them? And maybe for other listeners who have friends who are still indoctrinated in a group of some kind.
Yeah, it's a cruel reality, that like even in a family with very narcissistic parents or a parent, the siblings will turn against each other when what they really need to do is to join together to protect each other. Typically, a sibling, one will side with the parent, and the other one, who's trying to say, no, this parent is an abuser, will be looked upon as the crazy one. So that happens just on the smallest scale of a family. And of course, it's going to happen in a cult. The people who leave and say, this cult is abusive, it's impossible. There's no situation where some followers aren't going to stay with that group. Even after City Yoga was totally exposed in the New Yorker magazine in November 1994, thousands of people left, but there's still a nucleus of, 500 people that will never, ever leave. And
I heard about it when I lived there.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
And a few of those people were people that I loved, and I thought they loved me. One of those people who I wrote to and said, I'm leaving, this is why, and I never heard from him again. 25 years later, I got an email, I'm out. I read your book. Let's talk.
Wow.
How'd that feel?
It was beautiful. I was so happy, and not at all begrudging that he didn't leave sooner. Why didn't he get it sooner?
Sure.
Blah, blah, blah. It's like he left. He's ready to go, and he can recover at his own pace. He doesn't have to think all the things I think. But some of these people that won't leave, that thing they do in the South where they say, well, bless their heart. I mean, you just have to kind of bless their heart, let them be, and hope that they find their way one of these days. Because if you go after them, oh, man.
No.
Okay, so when it gets to an extreme level where you have someone in a position of power, leadership, etc., I always think people's behaviors become obvious when they don't have people locking horns with them. If they have a flat affect next to the dogmatic behavior, right? But normally that's impossible because they're poking at people and they're doing things to be antagonistic. And they go, look, see, this person's crazy, but they caused the craziness, right?
Right.
So how do you educate people where there just seems to be a limit to where the narcissist can go? So let's say, maybe it starts in schools. Maybe you start in like the 4th, 5th grade, and maybe the one that's potentially going down that path can have a little bit of awareness of like, oh my God, this is where this leads, or or this is how to navigate it, or this is how to do it. Because I'm very interested. I think the things that schools aren't teaching are mostly financial and narcissistic and abuses of power. And ultimately, these are abuses of power. So I don't know, what would you suggest? And maybe I'm just getting this kind of work going on in my head of like, what can people do? What recourses do people do when they find themselves in a situation like this? And what's the solution? I guess everyone looks at it as a problem. And they look, is it something to solve, or like, how do you do it?
We don't necessarily get taught or modeled by our teachers what it means to think critically. So critical thinking skills are not adequately understood and taught in our educational system. That's a big problem. And yes, it would go a long way to teach critical thinking skills and to teach empathy. There are nations that teach empathy. And in fact, Germany, from the time you are in grade school, you will start to learn about the atrocities of the Nazi era. And you will learn that in grade school, middle school, high school, college, and graduate school. You will not be a German without understanding the depths of that cruelty and the total loss of empathy. So empathy can be taught, and critical thinking.
Empathy is the antidote.
Yeah, and critical thinking.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, it's still not going to inoculate everyone. It just won't.
For sure.
This whole worshiping false idols thing has been going on since the human race
Dawn of time.
began.
Yeah, I think you might be interested in this. I listened to a lecture of someone who's controversial now, I think disproportionately to what the controversy they're causing, just simply because words are being crammed down his mouth. But it's a lecture Jordan Peterson gave about Nietzsche and a lot of the philosophers in the late 1800s, in essence predicting what was going to happen in communist Russia. And he talks about, kind of what you talked about. You're never going to eradicate this stuff because mankind, in a lot of ways, is always going to have those forces. The forces, you can call them whatever you want. I think they're love versus hate, and that's simplifying it because I think it's way more nuanced. But those are the forces, and I think the people who hate are very motivated to go out and destroy more so than the people that are more motivated to spread love.
Yeah.
Or they have more options because they're willing to do things that people who have coming from a place of love just aren't willing to do.
Right. It's born out of trauma. We're not, as human beings, we don't learn to hate unless we're traumatized. As dogs don't learn how to hate unless they're traumatized,
Right.
And that's the other thing that could be taught. Parenting and attachment theory. Why does it matter that you love your children and that you create safety for them? Well, because then you don't have traumatized people who go crazy later in life.
Right.
That's a good solution. But a couple stories here. So I know you've heard our other episodes with the What Chaps My Ass segment.
Yes.
And since the theme of this particular episode is educating on narcissism, is there some particular thing that Guru Mai did that was particularly chapping of your ass?
Oh, so many things. But one of them was this elaborate special meeting of special people, and only her and her partner, this guy George. We were assigned to some other staff person in the ashram, and we were going to harass that person every day, all week, just because this was going to be good to burn their ego. And at the end, we would be able to tell them that Guru Mai told us to do this and that it was part of their sadhana or their spiritual, progress. Well, of course, when we had the meeting at the end of the week after I had been a complete asshole to this poor switchboard operator for a whole week, of course, Guru Mai is just sitting there going, you're not going to tell them that it was Guru Mai. You're just going to say it was you. And you're never going to tell it was Guru Mai. And I guess what chaps my ass, really, if I think about it, is why didn't I fucking leave at that point and say, you asshole, how dare you? What kind of a sick fuck are you? But no, I stayed, I don't know how many more years, participating in bullshit like that, thinking for who knows what reason. Well, I know what reasons. That this was actually a good thing that was going to help people. And, you sincerely and honestly believe it. But there's a part of me, I know, at that moment and many, many others, There was a part of me going, this is bullshit. This isn't right. And yet, what chaps my ass is that I did not listen to my own inner voice. That's what chaps my ass.
Yeah, God, I hear you on that one. There's been so many that we all wish we'd said something different, but all we can do now is impart those to other people and give them the strength to leave now if they're listening and they're in some similar abusive situation.
Amen.
Don't wait for another 10 years to tell us on a podcast about what chaps your ass, and get out now.
Amen. Amen.
So I'm going to share mine with you too, Dan, since this is also part of the segment. My chaps my ass is remembering that there was, you were always getting feedback, and the higher up the ranks that you went in NXIVM, you were basically saying, I will subject myself to more feedback at any time. But you couldn't, as a lower rank, give feedback to an upper rank. So let me tell you my story. I was in a Jeunesse weekend in Los Angeles, and I'm not going to say her name, but one of the leaders of Jeunesse, who happened to also be we were a similar rank, but she had more stripes than me, and she was she was teaching Jeunesse. And as you know, part of NXIVM is about keeping your word and being on time and all of these things. And every morning I'd say, hey, let's get up and we'll do a hike before we teach, because we're up in Pacific Palisades. And every morning she was late. And one day I just said, and I had to work up the courage to say, can I share something with you that I see, which is that you say that you're going to get up at 7:30, and then I end up waiting. If you don't want to hike with me, that's fine. But if you could let me know what you're going to do. I'm like trying to tiptoe around, like giving her this feedback. And basically she said to me, instead of just being, oh, thanks for pointing that out, like, I'll look at that, Sarah. She said that I was being controlling and that I needed an EM around my control around time, because it was really hard for everyone around me because I was so controlling around time. And she ended up giving me an EM, which I'll never forget, because I felt like I was hallucinating on mushrooms while looking at her face. The thing that she taught me, like the nugget from that EM, is that time does not exist. In fact, time is not linear. And that I remember feeling like I was drowning in the ocean, and somehow that was freeing for me, because I would no longer be tied to the rigidity of the time structure that existed in my limited brain. That's what I got from it. And this woman continues to be late.
You turn being completely gaslighted into being illuminated and enlightened. You have to take that bullshit and make it into how you're being enlightened by it.
Yep.
When all you had to do was read Einstein.
Could have read Einstein.
The best way that I could recover from what had happened to me was to build a good, healthy, strong life.
Absolutely. That handles a lot of it.
Making that the focus. That's what we're all trying to do anyway, but we got derailed both first by the cult, and then if we're obsessed with the cult beyond a certain point, after we leave it, we're still not building our own strong, healthy, good life.
Totally.
So that's got to be the focus. That's the best way to go. What you're doing is helping other people through the writing, through the podcast, through the documentary. I have also engaged in helping other people through what I wanted to write, with the hopes that it could be helpful, and also be an expression of who I am and what I believe. And that's all good. That's building a good, strong, healthy life.
That's great advice.
Well, Dan, thank you for your help in our journey as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. And you've really been such a key part of Team Heal, Sarah and Nippy.
Well, it was an honor. I was honored. I knew it was a big deal from our first Skype. I knew what NXIVM was. I knew a little bit about it. I'd heard from others, but I knew this was not just a regular bunch of people leaving. This was bigger. And it's become, I think, really as meaningful as the work that Leah Remini has been doing about Scientology and in educating the public about cults. And that's why I get 3 calls a day now about cults.
I'm so glad. And tell us about the book that's coming out this summer, your new book.
My first book was Traumatic Narcissism, Relational Systems of Subjugation. So number 2 is being called Traumatic Narcissism and Recovery. And the subtitle is Leaving the Prison of Shame and Fear. And it's really about recovering from traumatic relationships. It's about adult children of narcissists or adult victims of narcissists in relationships. It's about my work with those people. And it's about a few other things, but that's the main focus. Yeah, so it'll be out, published by Routledge in July. It should be out. Congrats.
Amazing. We will promote that on our end when it's time. And if there's one nugget you could share for our listeners, many of whom are in cult recovery, in terms of healing from that book, or something that you'd suggest to help people get their lives back?
Yeah. Well, even if you can't locate a cult expert, go ahead and get into therapy with a trauma expert, somebody who knows about PTSD, and take your time and be slow. And if your therapist is not willing to educate themselves more about cults, then find somebody who is. So that's one word of advice. Take the time to construct a coherent narrative of how you got in, what happened while you were there, and what's going on for you now that you've left. Having in your own mind a narrative that makes sense, that feels real and honest, is actually a very healing thing. And you can do that by journaling, you can do it by writing, by talking with others in groups or in your own therapy. But one way or another, tell your story in a way that makes sense and that feels real. Learn from it. Learn from your own story. The other thing I would say is that you thought in the cult that you were going to have a transcendent express train to enlightenment. And in fact, nobody ever gets that. Nobody has it. And you're just going to have to trudge along like a normal human being, trying to learn and grow as you go. And that's a beautiful thing. Just make that a beautiful thing and love it.
You made me cry. I wanted a fast track.
We all did. We all did.
Oh, Dan, you are such a joy to talk with. Just so grounded and kind. And it's really a treat to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so pleased that you asked me to do this. I think it's a great piece of work you guys are doing, and I hope it continues. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been an honor to be a part of all of this.
Thank you, Dan. That was great. Dan, I think, has the quote for me, at least I'm going to take out of it. Empathy is the antidote. And Dan embodies that. One thing I'd like to touch on, Bonnie Peace, who most of you know from The Vow, made a list, and Sarah referenced in her intro that Dan was on that list. We hope to have Bonnie and Mark at some point on our podcast, but I would like to do a shout out to Bonnie and congratulate her for being cast in the Star Wars show. That's all I can say. And I spoke to Mark this week, and my response to that is the universe is always right. And I think that's such a great story to see Bonnie coming out on top and working. And
light always wins.
Right. And I think more good things are going to be coming out of Bonnie. So congratulations to her.
So happy. So I guess that's it.
Yeah, that's it. That's it for our guests in season 1. And we're contemplating having a Q&A, but we'll see. Until then, don't join a cult.
Stay out of cults, my friends. Thanks for listening. Thank you for your support. Bye-bye.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean. I'm hanging on to the weight of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
We're going to be back soon with more episodes of A Little Bit Culty with more experts and survivors, and sometimes experts who are survivors, and some familiar faces from The Vow.
If you got suggestions or questions on upcoming topics, find us on Instagram at A Little Bit Culty.
And for more background on what got me to this point, my memoir, Scarred, the true story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life, is available on Amazon, Audible, and wherever books are sold.
If you'd like to help us spread the word about A Little Bit Culty podcast, please give us a 5-star review and tell your friends to subscribe.
Like literally take their phone out and press subscribe.
5 stars. That's 5 of them.
We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every major listening app. A Little Bit Culty is executive produced by me, your co-host, Sarah Edmondson, and Anthony Nippy Ames. Associate producer is Jess Tardy. Produced, edited, mixed, and mastered by Citizens of Sound. Our amazing theme song, Cultivated, is by John Bryant and co-written by Nigel Asselin. Additional original music is composed by Will Rutherford.
We'll be back with more episodes. Until then,
Don't
join
a
a cult.
I'm Sarah Edmondson, and thanks for listening to A Little Bit Culty.